We are very excited to provide this presentation today on starting seeds indoors. And this is a new collaboration that we have between the Garden of Edin in Edinboro, Goodell Gardens, and Unity in Edinboro. And I'm hoping that this will be an opportunity for a lot of folks to enhance their existing knowledge of starting seeds, but and then also maybe some newcomers haven't done this before, and developing a new skill. All right, so I believe we should be all good with the sound, and we're all good with the panels not being in the way. So I'm going to proceed with this slideshow. And if at any time you have questions, you can just place your questions in the chat, and I'll take those at the end. And please make sure that you're muted, just so that we don't have any sound issues. So again, just want to acknowledge our partners. We dreamed up this idea last fall, and it's really cool to see it come to fruition. It's really a collaboration of many different entities here in Edinboro, and not only providing this information, but also a place where folks can start their own seeds. All right, so the source of information for this presentation, this is a fact sheet, Starting Plants Indoors from Seed, which is a publication of New Hampshire Extension. This seemed to be a really good resource, written by Becky Seidman. And at the end, I will make sure that this is shared with everyone, either through a follow-up email or in the chat at the end. I will make sure that I do that, so that you can have access to the information. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So you may be asking, why start seeds indoors? Well, in the wake of COVID, a lot of people have come to realize that we really have a lot to do to reconnect with the earth. And lockdown inspired a lot of people to spend more time outside. It also got a lot of people thinking about trying to get away from just, the big global supply chain of food, but connecting with plants at home, and that's the joy and the excitement and the learning that comes with growing your own food, and seeing just the amazing life cycle, starting with this little tiny seed and then sitting at that kitchen table and having those fresh cooked beets, or having a salad from lettuce grown in a garden. It's rewarding. It really it's very life affirming. It helps us feel connected to the earth, and see how we all depend on plants to survive. So you'll see here, saving money is another benefit. A lot of vegetable gardeners, they may just choose to do transplants. They get the transplants in late May, early June, and put them in the ground, and that's fine. But if you grow them from seed, then you are now able to see this whole process, and you get that intrinsic satisfaction. You also get to grow unusual varieties that are not available in stores and in nurseries. You're really just limited to what is in the nursery or the greenhouse where you're purchasing transplants. But with seeds, that really opens up a lot of possibilities. And if you really get into vegetable gardening, it's easy to fall in love with the excitement and the joy of trying many different varieties. That's one of the beautiful things about gardening. Is it's like this, I think of it as a symbiotic relationship between humans and plants that's been going on for hundreds of years, thousands of years, as people have and cultures have developed different varieties with unique tastes and unique characteristics. And it's like a lifelong journey learning about all the different varieties. So not just growing basil, but all the different kinds of basil, and all the differences in flavor, and how they can be used in different cuisines and different dishes. Another thing here, plants receive a head start and can flower earlier than seeds started outside later. So yeah, you can direct sow your seeds in the garden after the final frost-free date. However, by starting them inside, that gets things going a lot faster, and then the plants will be able to flower and produce fruit sooner, and you'll have a better yield. And the crazy thing about all this is actually really very easy. Now, there are some common issues that people can run into, and we'll hit some of those, address those as we go on here. but I think you'll find that it's not as difficult as some people may lead you to believe. So the first thing is planning. And this is actually one of the most exciting parts of the year, getting the seed catalogs in January and just that dreaming phase, thinking of what kind of plants you're going to have in the garden and how you're going to organize the garden, and just the planning phase. It's a very exciting time. It's very important that you try to stick to good quality seeds. You want to make sure that you're not using seeds that are of a lower quality or that have expired. They're several years old. They may not be as inclined to germinate. All right. And you want to grow varieties that will perform well in the local climate. Now, it's not just the local climate we're dealing with. There's also microclimates within a garden. So, if you're thinking like, oh, I've got a spot that gets really hot and it's really sunny in the summertime, then, peppers will do well in a place like that. And if you have a place that's a little cooler, a little more moist, that could be a good place for lettuce. So think about not only our climate and our USDA zone and the weather we get here, but also like little microclimates within the space that you have to work. All right, and then just a note, not only is there the opportunity to work with Unity in Edinboro to start these seeds and to care for them in the next month or so, but the Garden of Eden is another really cool local organization where you can actually rent space. And it's a community garden. And so if you don't have space where you live to grow things, the Garden of Eden has you covered. And I'm also going to be doing a follow-up presentation next month, and we'll talk about gardening in containers as well. So if maybe you want to have like something on your balcony at home, or you just don't have a lot of space to plant in the ground, that's another option as well. All right, so when you're planting, it's also important to know about varieties and hybrids. So hybrids have been developed for unique traits and disease resistance. So, I mean, when you think about this continual evolving relationship between humans and plants, I always like to think of corn as an example. Scientists have tried to find like the wild ancestor of corn, right? And it's like it doesn't even look anything like what we know of as corn. So, over hundreds and hundreds of years, humans have basically driven the evolution of corn into this amazing thing that is now a staple of our diet. And we've done this with so many different crops to improve flavor, to try and have fewer seeds so it's easier to eat, to be prettier, to have a better color, to be more inclined to survive stressors such as disease. So it's good to, you could go down a whole rabbit hole of research and learning about all this. Again, it's a lifelong thing. There's so many varieties to learn about. And if you think you've learned everything about it, well, you've still got a long way to go. It's a lifelong journey. Always make sure that you're using seeds that are recent. I mean, if you have a few seeds left over from last year, that's fine, but you really want to try to stick to seeds from the current year, because the germination rate goes down over time. Yes, there are seeds that have been germinated that were from ancient civilizations that were kept and stored in just the right conditions. And that is true, but even just a few years for a lot of the kind of seeds you would be sowing in your greenhouse or in your garden, the germination goes down noticeably even in a few years. And certain crops more than others. You see the length of viability there varies by species. It's important to check seed packets for results of germination tests and dates. So the seed packet, you see the pictures I have here on the right, these are your friends. Do not lose these when you are starting your plants, because it will tell you what variety you have. So you can research and know if it's a hybrid or not. It will have information about how deep to plant the seeds into the soil, and also information about like how much fertilizer to use, when to put the seeds in the ground, and everything. So don't lose these. After you've planted the seeds, the last thing you want to do is throw this out. You want to file this away because this is an important reference. Okay. So a note about saving seeds. Saving seeds is a really cool topic, and I actually have another resource that I will send out at the end of the presentation with some more information about saving seeds. But it's very important you know that if you are saving seeds from hybrids, you are not necessarily going to get the same plants in the next generation. So, and also if you have, let's say you have some cucurbids. Cucurbids, it is a term for a broad group of plants like melons, squash, pumpkins, zucchini, cucumbers. If you have cucurbids growing in your garden near each other, like a pumpkin and a squash, and they cross-pollinate, and then during the summer, and you save seeds and then grow those, you might get some kind of inedible or undesirable plant that is neither of the two. So it's important to know, like, certain groups of plants are worth saving. Other ones, you just have to do your research. You want to use open pollinated varieties when saving seeds. And if you're going to store seeds, they need to be kept in a cool and dry place. I actually used to work at Ernst Conservation Seeds, and they had a whole warehouse. It was all climate controlled, just exact right temperature, the right humidity, which is a low humidity. And if you don't store them in the proper conditions, the germination rate of the rate of success will go down dramatically. So take some time to research that. Saving seeds can be a really amazing experience, because then you're really seeing the whole life cycle. You're not just depending on a company or a store to replenish your seeds next year. You actually are like part of the whole cycle, but just make sure you know how to do it correctly. All right, we have factors affecting germination. So essentially, seeds are they're like in a dormant state. And the idea is to break the dormant seeds to induce germination. And certain factors have to all be met in order for this to work. Now, of course, all different species are different. Some species in the wild will germinate only in certain growing conditions, like a peat bog, or they may only germinate in like a swampy type soil, or they might only germinate in a drier, rockier place. So there's variation, but some general rules for what you're probably here for, which is growing vegetables indoors. You want to have a consistent level of moisture. It's very important that it doesn't get waterlogged. I've done seed starting before. I was really into it for a period of time in my teen years, and I put a lot of work into growing a bunch of perennial plants from seed, and I was very disappointed when probably more than 50% of them damped off and I lost the plants. So it's very important that level of moisture is you don't overwater them. So consistent level of moisture during this period of germination, and then the proper amount of moisture later after they germinate. Now for light, some seeds like to germinate in dark conditions, some like to germinate in the light. So do your research. You want to make sure that you're providing the correct conditions. Now this is really important. Oxygen. A loose and airy growing medium is preferred. When the soil becomes compacted and or waterlogged, you can run into problems. Generally, the loose, airy growing medium is essentially the soilless mix that we're going to talk about in a moment with peat moss and vermiculite. Heat is also very important. The ideal temperature for germinating most seeds is 65 to 70 degrees, although there's usually an optimal temperature. For tomato, for instance, is 80 degrees, but they'll germinate in the 65 to 70 degree range. Okay, so I was already hinting at the seed starting media and the materials. So again, you want that loose, fine, uniform, well aerated substrate that is able to hold water and move the water through capillary action. You don't want super compacted substrate. It's also important, you want to have a sterile medium. If there are weed seeds or insects or disease-causing organisms, then you're going to really have issues. So vermiculite is a good sterile medium. And I'm actually going to send out an actual resource about vermiculite, because some of you may be curious what exactly it is. Essentially, it's a mica-like substance that's mined from the earth and then heated up to produce the product that is used in the soilless mixes. Another product you may also find is perlite. Perlite is a little bit larger. There's like white, they look like little white styrofoam pieces, but they're not styrofoam. Perlite helps with aeration. Vermiculite helps to regulate the moisture level, so that stores water and releases it as the plants need it. Now these things are mixed with shredded peat moss, which is another product that's mined. It comes from peat bogs. Now you're probably thinking in the back of your head, okay, he's talking about mining. That sounds a little bit troubling. And yes, indeed, it does. There is environmental disturbance that is required in order to mine peat, which involves going into bogs and removing hundreds and hundreds of years of built up non-fully decayed organic material in the form of peat. And the same with pit mining for vermiculite. So, you know, everything we do does have an environmental impact, and there are other options as well for growing plants, hydroponics and other options as well. But this is the most common way of doing it. This recipe here calls for 1 tablespoon of superphosphate and 2 tablespoons of ground limestone. A lot of plants like calcium-rich soil, and so having the ground limestone helps with that. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're using packs, like the cell packs, or if you're using pots, or you're using upcycled materials like egg cartons. Regardless of what you use, it's critical that there's drainage holes, because you don't want it to just, you know, keep collecting water and it just turns into a mucky mess, and then the seeds and or the seedlings rot. Now, a really cool option you'll see here on the right, these are called Jiffy peat pellets, and you can wet these and then they kind of like swell up, and you can put seeds in these. What's nice about these, and what's nice about the similar compostable pots, is that you don't have to worry as much about the transplanting. So when you go to put these things in the ground, or when you go to transplant them into a bigger pot, you don't have to disturb the roots as much. So it makes later transplanting easier. I know this is a lot of information I'm throwing at everyone. Again, if you have any questions, please don't be afraid to throw them in the chat. I see we've got 5 in there so far, so we'll look forward to answering those in a little bit. This is a really interesting map. This is from mygardenlife.com, and it's based on essentially the USDA hardiness zones map. And it shows you the last date in spring. I don't know for sure if you can see my cursor. You might not be able to, but I'm just pointing here between Edinboro and Erie. And you can see there's a even if you can't see my cursor, there's a very pale light blue band. Oops. Light blue band along the lake, and that's because the lake moderates the temperature, whereas inland it's a little bit colder and the frost is more likely to be later. You've probably heard a lot of people say Memorial Day is the time to plant, and that makes sense because our last frost is usually, it's often by May 16th, but there's a chance that we could have one through the end of May. If you're by the lake, you actually could get started possibly a little bit earlier. And as you can see, if you're in the more mountainous regions of McKean County, where it's pink, it can frost a little bit into June. So some different zones there. So when should I start seeds? Well, it depends on these estimated last frost dates. So, and it also depends on a few other factors: the time it takes for the seeds to germinate and the seedlings to grow, as well as the growing conditions that you can provide. So, for instance, if you have heating pads for the cell pack trays versus not having the heating packs, that can affect, you know, how quickly things move along. But the ideal time range is somewhere in the 4 to 12 weeks range before transplanting them outdoors. So right now we're like late March, and we're about 8 weeks from late May, 9 weeks from early June, which is when you'll be wanting to put them out in the ground. Be careful if you start seeds too early and then you have to hold them back because you can't get them outside yet, they will become lanky and they will not do as well outside. So it's important to time it well. And please know that with any of this stuff, it is a continual learning process. And, you know, if things don't work out perfectly one year, take notes, reflect on what went well, what didn't, and then the following year you can learn from that. It's a continual process. I know people who have done stuff like this for years, and they're constantly learning. Every year is different. Now, planting depth is important. As I was researching for this presentation, I found a really handy guideline here, that the depth of the seed should be about approximately, I can't quite see the other part of it here, there we go, approximately twice the diameter of the seed. So, you know, if the seed is like 1/8 of an inch in diameter, then you would want to have about 1/4 inch down into the soil. And extremely small seeds, you don't want to bury them. You want to have them right on the top. Just kind of pack them into the soil and then spritz them with a little bit of water. You definitely don't want to use too much water or they could wash away. So there you go. There's the fine mist spray I mentioned. You don't want to have flooding or splashing. And at this stage, while you're waiting for germination, an even level of moisture is critical. Now, a lot of times people will use like, they can use plastic bags or wrap or some of those cell packs they'll come with like a plastic lid. Some people use panes of glass. This will help to maintain an even level of moisture, but you have to be careful about a runaway greenhouse effect. As you know, if you put your car out in the sun on a hot day in July or August, the heat really collects in there. So if you put this in the direct sunlight, you could end up cooking the seeds to death. So be careful about that. And once the seedlings sprout, you remove the covers. The cover should not be less than 1.5 inches above the soil. And then, of course, standard practice is to use like a common household diluted fertilizer to help the plants, because the growing medium is essentially neutral in terms of pH, and it doesn't have nutrients. So adding fertilizer will provide the nutrients to the plants that they need as they start to grow. Now, bright light is critical now at this point. Remember, some of the plants, they might like to germinate in darkness. Regardless, you don't want to put them in super bright light, like I just said, because you know with the plastic over them, they could get too hot. But once they've germinated, now it's like it's all about the light. You know, plants, they essentially eat the sunlight. They are able to use that for their energy. They don't have to eat any other organism. They just take in the sun and it gives them the energy. I wish I could do that. That would be amazing. If only we could all be capable of photosynthesis. So at this point, they need light, and they need that to nourish them. And if you don't give them enough light, and they kind of have to like struggle to find light, they could become lanky. Now, in the Unity Center in Edinboro, we have a setup, thanks to Livia Hamersky, Jen Shepard, and a few of our other friends have collaborated to set up some shelves along some south-facing windows. But there will also be some lights there as well to supplement the natural light. 40-watt full spectrum fluorescent lights are good. You want to have them about 6 inches above the plant. And I gave a picture here. These are LED sunlight grow light gardens. There's a variety of products you can get like this that work really well. Seedlings need about 16 hours of light per day. So you don't want to have the light on 24/7. All right, so transplanting and fertilizing. It's very important that you transplant the seedlings before they become too tall and lanky, ideally when the first true leaves appear. So on this picture on the right, you'll see there's this fancy word here, cotyledons, and then true leaves. So seeds, when they germinate, they have these special seed leaves that are different from any leaves that they produce the rest of their life. And they're called cotyledons. Some plants will only have one cotyledon, and that would be things like in the lily family, things like onion, garlic, chives. And then a lot of things have two cotyledons, like this member of the cucurbit group. And so once you can see that the true leaves are starting to form in between the two cotyledons there, that means the time is approaching to transplant into a larger area to grow. You can use a knife to dig up and separate individual seedlings. You want to plant them at the same depth as before. That can be a common issue or a common mistake if you have roots that are exposed or if you plant them too deep. When you handle the plants, make sure that you are handling them by their leaves and not their delicate stems, and you want to try it as much as possible. Avoid disturbing the roots. Spacing is also very important. So, you know, if you have several that germinated in one thing and you want to separate them out, make sure that you give them enough space. to expand. Also, just a little aside that I'll mention here, it's good to get to know some of the major groups of plants. So I mentioned cucurbids, which are cucumbers, watermelons, pumpkins, squash, zucchini, things like that. We have the nightshades, which are things like potatoes, tomatoes. I believe eggplants and peppers are also in that group. And then we also have what are called the brassicas, which are in the mustard family. And that's things like kale, cabbage, collard greens, broccoli. So it's good to get to know some of these groups because there are certain characteristics of each group and caring for each one of them. All right, so newly transplanted seedlings are very, very much in a fragile state. It's kind of like, you know, if you're in a transition in life and you've lived somewhere for, you know, several years, and then you move, let's say from Edinboro out to California, right? You're going to feel really like shocked, like, whoa, everything's different, everything's changed. Like it's a transition is a difficult time for humans to be transplanted. Well, imagine it's just as difficult or more difficult for plants. And this is during this time, excessive heat or direct light really can cause problems. I know from whether you're transplanting a small seedling like this or a larger perennial ornamental plant, when you transplant, you have to be careful about making sure that things get watered well because wilting can happen during this time. Supplemental nutrients may be required moving forward. So this is, again, that fertilizing with a dilution. And the ratio of fertilizer, you want to make sure that you have that correct. Check the seed packets. It may likely have the recommended level on it, or do some web research. But be careful, too much fertilizer can burn the plants. So you want to make sure that you do this right. You don't want to end up with a plant like the one here on the right that sadly did not make it. Pale yellow or purplish leaves indicated deficiency in nutrients. The primary nutrients, as many of you may know, are nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And you want to have those in the proper proportions. And you'll know that your plants are healthy if they're sturdy and dark green. Now, one other thing about transplanting. So we're talking about transplanting and fertilizing. There are some plants that just do not like to be transplanted. And there are plants that have a taproot. Carrots, that's a great example right there. If you try to start carrots inside and then transplant them, that's really difficult to do. You should just sow them outdoors instead. I can speak from personal experience of sowing them outdoors, and the germination was great, and so many of them came up, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to try and thin these and spread them out, and it totally failed. They do not like to be moved. And in my experience, a lot of plants that have tap roots are very sensitive to transplanting. So just sow the carrots directly, and when you thin them, it's probably not worth it to try and save the thinned out ones and place them somewhere else because they do not like to be transplanted. Now, hardening off plants, that's acclimating them to the outdoor environment. The outdoor environment is completely, dramatically different to what they're used to inside your house or inside the Unity Center or in a greenhouse. Conditions are way, way more extreme outside because the temperature can really go extremely high and then really, really low. Also, the humidity is at a totally different level. The wind can stress the plants. The watering regimen is different. So all these things in combination can even kill your plants. So you may have heard of hardening off your plants. Well, what you want to do is make sure that you introduce them gradually. So take them out for a few hours here and there, put them in the shade. Don't put them in direct sun because that will really shock them. And you want to do this about 1 to 2 weeks before planting in the garden. And then you just gradually more and more time outside, gradually a little bit less watering, but just make sure your plants don't dry out. And then after that 1 to 2 weeks is up, if that should align with about the end of May, beginning of June. And then that's the time to start putting these things in the ground. All right, I have one more slide about starting seeds. And so these are some really challenging plants. And some of this is actually a little bit beyond what a lot of you need to worry about with growing your own vegetables, but it's just some other additional information that's good to be aware of, particularly with native perennials and ornamental woody plants. Breaking seed dormancy can be a challenge. So stratification is required. And if you think about it, plants have evolved to experience winter. And so there's this like expectation that there needs to be a really good freeze or a period of cold. And then that way seeds, it's essentially an evolutionary adaptation. So seeds germinate in the spring and not in the fall, because if they germinate in the fall and then they get killed by the winter, that's not advantageous to the plant. So to simulate that, some plants, their seeds need to be subject to cold treatment to break the dormancy. And some plants like that, you may have to do a treatment of 1 to 6 months to stratify them. But again, this is getting a little more advanced. This is kind of more advanced, like if you're collecting your own, saving your own seeds, particularly with flowering perennials and ornamentals. You know, lupine seeds and other perennials, you have to make sure that they get the exact right treatment before they are started. Another thing is, in addition to stratification, you'll see scarification, and it kind of sounds like, whoa, we're going to scar the seeds, and actually that's literally what it is. They have an outer coat that does not allow gaseous exchange and water absorption, which those are mandatory for germination. So by scarring through abrasion or a chemical erosion, sulfuric acid, those can overcome that. When I used to work at Ernst Seeds, I do remember in the greenhouse, our greenhouse manager, I recall her talking about soaking seeds in sulfuric acid. And I remember thinking, whoa, really? And that helps to break down that outer coat and break that dormancy. Again, this is more advanced stuff, but if you want to get into seed saving, then it's good to dip your feet into this a little bit and learn more about it. If you're getting seed packets, obviously everything is going to be ready to go. All right, so before I jump into the next part, I'm going to go ahead and field some questions in the chat. And then after that, I'll give an opportunity for folks to unmute and talk about if you want to share comments, reflections, or questions. So let me see here. Should you soak your seeds before planting? Yeah, so there, I was reading about stratification, and there are some plants where that helps them to germinate better. So it's good to, again, do your research on the particular thing that you're growing and what's recommended. I feel like if you're planting something from a seed packet, that shouldn't be necessary. But read the instructions in the packet, and it may depend on the plant. What about cold weather plants like greens or root vegetables? I have never planted these before, but was advised recently plants such as spinach, kale, and beets can go in the ground in April for our zone. Yes, good question. So I've kind of explained the default of growing, putting most things out, like your tomatoes and your peppers and eggplants, things like that, later spring, late May, early June. But yeah, there are some colder weather plants that can be started sooner. I mean, the classic example, peas can be started a lot earlier. Let's see, what are some of the things that were mentioned here? Advised recently things that yeah, kale is a cool weather plant. What's really neat about kale is, that onset of winter in November, right? And it's like, oh man, the growing season's over. It's kind of a downer time of the year, but some of those cold weather plants continue to do well. You can harvest kale into the early winter. Another one, if I recall correctly, parsley. It also will continue to be around well into the fall. So yes, yeah, there's differences depending on what plants you're growing. Okay, those are the 2 questions I see in the chat. If anybody has any other questions to plop into the chat, feel free. And I'm going to give an opportunity for folks to unmute themselves. And this is being recorded, so if you know somebody who wanted to be here this evening and was not able to, we'll get this recording out and you can forward that to them. And you can also view it at a later time for future reference. Does anybody want to unmute and ask any questions? I'll give about 10 seconds in case anyone thinks of anything.
Andrew, I just wanted to share that we are live streaming today's class on our Facebook page. So if anybody wants to share this information with friends and family, we'll send out that link, but you could certainly find it right on our Facebook page as well. Okay.
Awesome. That's super convenient. So yeah, just head to Facebook, and there you also find all the information about our programs and everything that we're gearing up for this season. So one last chance for some questions? Are we able to get this PowerPoint email? Yes, that's a good question. So what I'm going to do here, hold on a second. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, that should have worked. And I'm just going to send it right now. This is probably the easiest way to do this. I'm going to copy and paste the link to the PowerPoint into the chat. Will that work, Amber, if I do that?
I'm not sure, Andrew. Let's just wait and do that at the end. Why don't you bring your PowerPoint back up though? Because we have more stuff we want to talk about in it, right?
Yeah, we do. Okay, yeah, let's do that afterwards. We'll figure it out, because as I recall, in order to sign up, it collected email addresses, right?
Yeah, I have everybody's contact information.
Okay, we'll just do that. So I'll collect the email addresses. We'll send the PowerPoint out, and then I will send out the other online resources, including the fact sheet that this information is based on. So we'll make sure that you have access to everything. All right, somebody put in here, we have some of this information Andrew talked about hanging up at Unity. Yes, definitely. If you haven't been to Unity, or you're not viewing this at Unity right now, I encourage you to check out the setup there, because the idea is to try and make this opportunity to start seeds much more accessible to everyone. And that's why Unity is providing not only the space to grow the seeds, but also some assistance and expertise. And the current plans are to have like certain open hours during the week to come in and check on your plants. And we will be watching over them. It'll be myself, I know Amber, and then Jen Shepherd of Unity, and a few others are going to be coming in and checking on the plants. So encourage you to get involved with Unity. And I also encourage you to check out the Garden of Edin. It's on Route 6N, heading toward Waterford out of Edinboro. And that is a great place to rent a space and grow your plants. Oh, another thing I should note, we're going to have like a seedling swap during our Mother's Day event. So I'm going to go back into my PowerPoint, and I'll pull up our upcoming events. Okay, so jumping down to the third one, or the fourth one. No, wait, is it? It's down here. Mom's Market on May 13th. This is our Mother's Day event, and so it'll be an opportunity to bring seedlings and trade seedlings on our site here at Goodell Gardens. You can see we have a lot of events actually on here. Just coming up in another couple of weeks, Benevolent Beers at 5 p.m. at Erie Ale Works. This is a really cool opportunity to help support Goodell Gardens and Homestead. As you probably already know, we have another virtual program coming up on April 27th. It will be the second and final in the series. And we're going to talk about companion planting. So if you're growing things in the ground and you have a little more space, we'll also talk about container gardening if space is more limited for you. So this hopefully will have something relevant for everyone. And we have so many cool events this year. If you've not been to Goodell Gardens, it is an absolutely gorgeous site. We do not charge admission to see the gardens. We're open from May through October, Wednesday through Sunday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can just come on in and check out our welcome center, take a walk along the gardens. We have hiking trails. A particularly beautiful time to visit is around Memorial Day, when the rhododendrons and the azaleas are blooming. And we have all kinds of cool events planned this year. You'll see Tree Hugger Trail Run. That's how we're kicking off our open season, which we are still taking signups if you would like to be part of that. We'll have kids activities as well for that. And then throughout the summer, actually throughout the entire season, I give guided tours of the gardens on almost every Sunday of the season. And that starts May 7th. And then we're actually introducing some guided tours of the trails this year as well. We'll have 3 special trail hikes, one in May, one in July, and one in September. Public programs, if you want to come on out and delve into various horticultural topics, sessions related to sustainability and the environment, nature, native plants, all those kinds of things. I cover those in public programs. We are introducing a brand new series this year, Bittersweet Beauties, where we'll talk about poisonous plants and invasive plants, and that starts on May 7th. There's the Mom's Market on May 13th. The Art and Music Festival is actually the Burroughs event, but it's on site, and it's a 3-day weekend event, and it's really awesome. We are introducing a new environmental book club this year. We're going to be reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Bringing Nature Home by Douglas Tallamy, and several other really great books, and having some discussion sessions. And then you can see guest speaker series. We have a lot of cool experts coming in, including 2 experts from Holden Arboretum. We're going to be talking about rhododendrons. And then you can see we have the summer music series, free of charge to everyone. Children's programs. We have every age imaginable, from preschool to high school. We have something for everyone. Those all start in June. And I will send out a link to our website so you can actually see all the dates and access to register if you're interested. We also have botanical beverages in July, movies under the stars in August, and the Harvest Festival. We're hoping to do some kind of follow-up that's actually tied to this program, involving some kind of an art show during that event. We're still working the details of that out. So a lot of really cool stuff coming up. And if just to give you a sense, the pictures here of there's myself doing a program on daylilies. We provide daylilies for people to try with different dessert items because they are edible. You can see there's a picture of me showing a dogwood flower to a guided tour group, and there at the bottom, our wonderful Mother Nature teaching the preschoolers about the gardens. So those are all the cool things coming up. The most imminent is the Erie Ale Works Benevolent Beers. Join us at 416 West 12th Street in Erie on Thursday, April 6th from 5 to 8 p.m. We'd love to see you there. And I would like to thank everyone for coming out for this program. I'm really excited to see it's well attended. And if anybody has any other questions, just feel free to pop them into the chat.
Andrew, I'm going to answer the one that Andrew just typed in. Are you allowed to bring a leashed dog on the trails? We do allow folks to bring leashed dogs that are well behaved, have all of their appropriate vaccines, and are on a leash. As long as you clean up after them on the trails. We'd prefer people not bring their dogs into the formal gardens though. So the trails are great. We would recommend, if you are somebody that uses a tick preventative, you make sure your dog has that, just because we have a lot of deer activity on the site. But we love doggos, and we're excited to see you bring yours, Andrea. So thank you.
Wonderful. Amber, do you have any other announcements to make?
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It's really kind of fun. This is our first virtual program that Andrew and I have done together, which is pretty cool. And we're really excited to kind of kick off our season. We're also super grateful to partner with our friends at Unity and the Garden of Eden to help make this seed starting project happen. Please take a look at our website, goodellgardens.org. Andrew will share that with us. Afterwards, we'll send out some information. But just thanks so much for being here. And we're just super duper excited to be part of this amazing community project.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I hope you all have a great evening.